Alright, so question 1 asks us to explain the reactions and purposes of three enzymes known as ATPase, ATP synthase, and creatine kinase. Starting with ATPase, this is going to be our bond breaker. ATPase is responsible for breaking the bond between the last two phosphates on the ATP molecule. The breaking of that bond does result in the release of energy, and that energy can be used to facilitate the contraction of muscles around the body. ATP synthase, moving on, is going to be known as our bond maker. This enzyme is responsible for taking a free-floating phosphate and adding it onto bonding it to an ADP molecule in order to create ATP. This process does require energy to complete, so we are using ATP to create ATP, but usually this is done in processes where we are going to obtain more ATP than used, which is good. And we also have creatine kinase. This enzyme is not always working, but it's working a good amount of time for us, but it is activated primarily when the concentration of ADP has increased, the concentration of ADP increases to a point in which it in the bloodstream where it activates creatine kinase. Once that point has been reached, creatine kinase comes out, and it is responsible for breaking and also forming bonds. Is in charge of breaking the bond between phosphate and creatine in the ATP PCR system. That breaking of that bond releases energy similar to breaking the last two phosphates of ATP, and that energy can be used to facilitate muscle contraction as well. But then creatine kinase also has the double job of also forming that bond again to later break it so we can release energy through the ATP PCR system again. So that enzyme is mostly only used in the ATP PCR system. ATP synthase is used every single point in any system where ATP is being formed from ADP, so that could be just anywhere in the body after ATP is used just to form ATP, or in the electron transport chain, complex 4 is just an ATP synthase, and that's mainly what its job is, except it only can do that job using the power generated from the passing of protons through it. So then it has the energy to synthesize ATP. ATPase is mostly just used. It's mostly just used in the it's mostly just used in the process of glycolysis to break that bond and release energy so that glucose can be converted to glucose 6-phosphate. And also everywhere else in the body where ATP is being broken for use of energy. But as far as metabolic systems go, mainly in the glycolysis process is where that one's going to be used the most.